So let's get some perspective on the Trump victory. We'll put it in perspective. Is it an American version of Europe's Brexit? Steve Hilton is a former advisor to British Prime Minister David Cameron, was part of the effort to get the UK out of the European Union. He joins us tonight from San Francisco. Steve, we talked at a couple of conventions. You said just at that point, at the beginning, you know, this feels like something different.
Yeah, it really did. And by the way, Brett, it's good to be with you. You can see I brought my special report jacket just for you. It's a very special occasion.
That is. You only wear the T-shirt usually.
That's right. I think that there's some really big similarities with Brexit and one really important difference. I think the similarities include what you've just been discussing, the way in which so many voters felt that they couldn't express support for Trump publicly and therefore weren't really being picked up by the polling and other measures. But I think the really important similarity is what's driving this wave of populism, which I think has expressed itself in the UK with Brexit and here, well, not just with Trump actually in his victory, but also with Bernie Sanders. And I think what's really behind that is this way in which over the last few decades, actually, it's not just the last few years, I think it's been going on for a few decades now, you've seen governments all over the world pursue a very similar technocratic policy agenda with some common elements, which is one, globalization of the economy, secondly, a kind of centralization of political power in government, and then thirdly, immigration without any kind of constraint. Now, that agenda has really done marvels for poor countries and for all sorts of people living in places like China and India. They've really benefited from that, as have the richer people in rich countries. But working people in rich countries, and certainly the poorest people in rich countries, have not particularly benefited from that. And that's been going on for a long time. And I think finally people are realizing that whoever they've been electing, the same technocratic agenda is delivered by their governments, and they've had enough of it. And that's what you're seeing happen here.
Yeah, they're blowing it up. Donald Trump tapped into that, and he realized it. He called it Brexit plus plus plus. I saw on Twitter today some Brits said, "We do Brexit, and the blanking Americans have to do it bigger." You know, so your thoughts on all of these the talk about the global economy somehow cratering in the wake of this election. We saw the markets today rally to the highest point almost in the Dow.
Well, I think this is where the difference with Brexit is really important. Brexit wasn't an election, it was a referendum. And the truth is that there was no clear plan put forward in the referendum campaign about how Brexit would be implemented. It was just, do you want to stay in the EU or leave? So when the decision was to leave, the next question is, well, what does this mean? The Prime Minister resigned. There was a terrible amount of uncertainty, which in a certain way is still going on to this day, where there's really no clarity about what Brexit looks like in practice. Here, however, with last night's result, this was an election with competing agendas and policy programs, and there was a clear winner, not just in the presidential race, but in Congress too. So what you've got in America, which is the difference and the much more positive difference, is now the chance of implementing a really clear policy agenda where you've got a Republican in the White House, Republican control of Congress. You saw a bit of that today with Paul Ryan's, it felt to me a very optimistic statement about how he's going to work with the new president and implement the kind of agenda that I think would really benefit the economy. And that's what I think you saw the markets responding positively to today.
And last thing, quickly, what about all of these world leaders scratching their heads, saying, you know, how did this happen? Who is this? What are we going to do with this new president to be?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was an interesting range of responses. I was pleased to see that Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, was pretty enthusiastic and said, look, we want to have a great relationship with the US and work together. And it's particularly important for her because she needs a really good trade deal with the US. I thought that the way in which some other leaders like Angela Merkel responded was pretty sour, frankly. And I think the reason they're scratching their heads is partly because some of the reporting of Donald Trump's campaign has been very skewed around the world. And people have seen, if you like, the worst elements of it, the most extreme and controversial elements. They're barely even aware that he has a policy program, that he has a serious agenda for economic reform. Now, I think that as he takes office and starts implementing that agenda, a lot of those concerns will fade away.
Steve Hilton, we love having you on. You kind of nailed this from the beginning. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Brett.